One of the best things about getting to explore our planet is that while it's still full of amazing wonders, there are still a lot of places that we have not yet discovered. It is also home to many deadly spots, and one of those places actually plays a key part in today's story. In this video, I will be showing some very sensitive images from the area that can make you feel very claustrophobic, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get started, my name is Andrea Scott, and I post weekly videos where I retell stories that majority of the people around the world have not heard of. So if this is something that might interest you, then please do subscribe, as it really helps me a lot to put out even more content out there, and it's always great to know that more people are on board. And today, make yourself a nice strong cup of tea and let's get into our story. Olomouc region in the Czech Republic is a home to a true wonder. Nested in a forested area near the river Bečva lies the entrance to the world's deepest underwater cave called Hranice Abyss. The entrance consists of a small lake that is surrounded by about 70 meters tall steep rocks. And so up until recently, where a metal staircase had been put in place, it was almost impossible to get to it. And so no wonder that this place is said to be used before as a perfect spot for execution, because people could not get out of it, and because it's so steep as well, they would have just fallen to their death. In fact, a legend has it that in year 1906, a ruler of the Great Moravian Empire named Mojmír II was pursued by a group of Hungarian soldiers that had ventured into the area. And because Mojmír knew about the abyss, he led the soldiers towards it, and because it was dark outside and they wouldn't have known the area at all, as Mojmír jumped in, they would have followed him and everybody would perish. The depth of the abyss itself has been a subject of great interest over the years. And of course, there have been numerous of attempts to measure how deep it truly is. In 2016, a remote controlled vehicle, or ROV in short, was sent down on a piece of string, surpassed the known measured depth, and got to as far as 404 meters underwater. This of course meant that the Italy's cave, Pozzo del Mero, which was believed to be the deepest underwater cave at the time, was now old news. This ROV, however, did not reach the bottom of the cave, but it did produce a very valuable recording of its dive. In 2022, a UX-1 Neo robot was sent down the cave again to measure its depth. Its main objective was not only to try and break the world record, but also map the widest part of the cave. So a special round-like robot was sent down the cave on a piece of string. And this robot was very high-tech. Not only did it have a camera to be able to capture all the moments from when it was underwater, but it also had all these lasers, so to be able to navigate through all the crevices, because this cave is not really a straight and smooth way all the way down. In fact, there are many twists and turns, and in some parts of the cave it is so narrow that this could be the very reason why so many others had failed to go deeper down, especially the ones that were doing it in person. Ultimately, the robot actually got to 450 meters down, breaking the world record again, but also it was able to produce a 3D map of the area to up until where it gotten into. Today, the explorers actually believe that the abyss could reach to as far as 1 kilometer down underwater. And so it is without a question that there will be more excursions in the future. But because the cave's depth has not been proven yet, and because of how many lives it has already claimed up until now, the Hranice Abyss is often dubbed as a gateway to hell. In the past, before all of this high-tech gear was available to us, most of the excursions would have been done in person by actual divers. And one of these excursions was to take place in year 1981. There, a small group of 6 very experienced divers decided to go down and see how far they could get to. All 6 members of this group have done these dives many times before, and so there really wasn't any other group that would be more suited for this task. They knew that in 1974, a probe was sent down the cave, and it was able to measure its depth to 175 meters down. However, up until that point, actual divers doing it the old-fashioned way, they were really only able to get to as far as 110 meters down. And so this group was thinking that maybe they could surpass it. Now, you need to understand that in order to do these deep dives, you can't just do it with any gear. Another thing to consider is that the deeper down you go and the more pressure is applied to your body, the more decompression stops you have to take on the way up. And this is because of the fact that when you're down there, you're not breathing pure oxygen. You're actually breathing a mix of oxygen and usually what is nitrogen and helium. And the latter 2 gases get dissolved into your bloodstream and they stay there up until you resurface again. And this is usually completely fine if you do take your time while you're going up. But if you were to resurface too quickly, you could suffer from what is known as a decompression sickness or the bends. This happens when the dissolved gas in your system, mainly nitrogen, comes out of the solution in the bloodstream and it then forms small gas bubbles that circulate throughout the system. And this can be extremely painful and in some scenarios even fatal. But if you're doing a deep dive, everybody is aware of this, and so that the decompression stops are factored into your dive so that you do not run out of air. And so on that day in 1981, these 6 divers divided themselves into 3 pairs and they decided to take turn in going underwater. And so the first pair goes in and they spent about an hour underwater. And when they finally come up, they shake off their gear and they tell the others that actually the underwater is very clear today and the conditions could not be better for the dive. But ultimately, they didn't really feel like going too deep in, and so they decided to come back up. And so the second pair thanks them, and they also put on all their gear and jump into the water. And again, they're enjoying their dive, and there are no obstacles in their way. But again, after some time, they decide to resurface, because again, they didn't really feel like going too deep in. The third pair, which consisted of a 40-year-old Vratislav Brenza and a 26-year-old Antonín Ševčík, could not wait to have their turn in going underwater. They were so excited about what the others were telling them about the visibility and the conditions. But as the other 2 pairs did not go as deep down as they had all agreed to, them 2 agreed that they would try to get to at least to 80 meters down. The older of them, Vratislav, was actually the record holder of the deepest dive done. And so if there was a person to do it, it was likely to be him. And so Vratislav and Antonín, they too put their gear on, fix their mask, and they jump into the water. They immediately navigate through the entryway and they start going deeper and deeper down the cave. And at first everything goes very smoothly. They're enjoying the sights of the cave because they can see everything clearly and there aren't really any obstacles in their way. Back on the surface, the other 4 men that had already finished their dive, they're packing their gear up and they agreed that maybe they could come back in the near future and attempt to dive again because they were a little bit disappointed that they didn't get to go as deep down as they wanted to, even though that the dive itself was very pleasant that day. However, after only a short while of the last pair being underwater, the 4 ashore are starting to notice that what first seemed to be a very smooth dive might not be entirely going according to plan now. Hey guys, if you're still here and enjoying this video, then please help me out and subscribe to my channel. It's very motivating for me to know that there are more people on board and that they wanted to see and hear about these stories. And so if you haven't done already, please do subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you never miss another one of my episodes again. Now let's get back into our story. It was only a few minutes after Antonín and Vratislav jumped in for the dive, and what was up until now a very smooth and calm water, the others are now looking at, and there are lots of all these big bubbles and foam coming up, as if the 2 divers were already returning up to the surface themselves. And so the 4 men, they stopped whatever they were doing at the time, and they hurried to the edge of the small wooden board that they were all floating on, and they were staring at the water, looking for the 2 divers to finally come and resurface. And sure enough, in just a few moments later, they saw Vratislav bolting up out of the water. And the others are looking at him very puzzled as they do not understand what had happened. But they immediately see that Vratislav is not alone and he's actually dragging the body of Antonin with him. And so the four men, they jump into the water and they start pulling Antonin's body out. And when it's laid out onto the wooden panel, they can clearly see that he's still unconscious and that bloody foam is forming out of his mouth. And so the divers begin to resuscitate Antonin. And they know that he's in big trouble because he's not really responding to anything. But back then, in 1981, they didn't really have any mobile phones. And so the leader of the group, they strapped on the pair of boots and he bolts out of the woods into the nearby station where a public phone was located. Meanwhile, Vratislav, who had not taken any decompression points on his ascent because he was trying to get out as soon as he can so as to be able to help Antonin, he was told to return down underwater to about 20 meters in depth so that his body could adjust and he too would not collapse. The three remaining men, they all took turns in trying to resuscitate Antonin, but he was still not being responsive. And ultimately, in about an hour when the ambulance arrived, he unfortunately had passed away because there's nothing they could have done for him. His body was lifted out of the abyss on a lift that was usually used to get the equipment of the divers down because he was just too treacherous to be able to lift his body up and carrying him on the small steps that led out of the cave. And when they finally got to the top, they had to wait another 3 long hours before the undertakers would finally come in and take Antonin's body away. The medical examiner would undertake a full autopsy of Antonin, and it was determined that he died because of drowning. However, many have a great difficulty in believing that this is actually what had happened to Antonin. First, his mouthpiece was actually still in place when he lost his consciousness down underwater. And second, the bloody foam that was coming out of his mouth would actually suggest that he might have died because he just resurfaced too quickly. This would mean that the air in his lungs expanded and it caused small tears, so that the blood would then flood into the lungs and it would form the bloody foam. But more importantly, the gas would get into his bloodstream, which would form millions of bubbles that would flood the system, and it would block the vessels and cut body organs from receiving oxygen and blood. This is also known as embolism, and in most cases is deadly. The biggest question, however, everybody was asking was, why did Antonin lose consciousness in the first place? He was very fit and extremely experienced, so that even if he was going down a bit too quickly and he was starting to get dizzy from the mixed air he was breathing, he should have recognized this and maybe pause or even return a few meters up so that his body could adjust to this. His diving partner, Vratislav, he was also not able to explain as to what had actually happened underwater, because he too was just puzzled by this whole scene. However, later on, everybody would find out that the most likely explanation as to why Antonin lost his consciousness was a small detail in the autopsy that was first overlooked. Several days prior to the dive, Antonin had to actually undergo a surgery because one of his teeth was getting infected and had to be taken out. This surgery was said to be very painful, and so Antonin was prescribed a very strong painkillers, and he was instructed to continue using these up until his wounds would be fully healed, which would take about a week or two. This drug, known as Dynal, was a combination of pain-relieving medicine that also contained a high level of barbiturates. And one of the known effects of these barbiturates is the ability to greatly reduce the sensitivity and alertness of the central nervous system. This drug was also used to be prescribed as a form of a sleeping pill, but because it was highly addictive and it was linked to many suicides because people were overdosing on it, it since has been replaced by a much less dangerous form of substance. And because there were traces of these barbiturates found in Antonin's body, it is very likely the reason why he was not aware that he was becoming more dizzy the deeper and deeper down he went. And either he never realized that this was actually happening to him, or when he did, it was likely already too late. Today, the entrance of the cave is marked with a small plaque in Antonin's memory. And so this yet again brings us to the end of our story. As always, thank you very much for joining in, and I will see you very soon with a brand new episode. Until next time.